Well, things are changing a little bit around here. I just cut off my veritable wheat field of hair, and I decided to rearrange my office a little bit. Although I haven't yet decided what to do with the empty wall space behind me. But one thing that hasn't changed, unfortunately, is that our world is going increasingly crazy. As I was perusing the internets this week, it came to my attention that Indiana University has chosen to honor a certain Alfred Kinsey by erecting a bronze statue of him on their campus. Yes, statues of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and other such historical figures are being torn down all across this country, but Kinsey gets one put up. If someone can explain this disparity to me, I'd really appreciate it. But the headline on Indiana U's own website reads, Bronze Sculpture of Alfred C. Kinsey marks 75th anniversary of the Kinsey Institute. The article goes on, a new bronze sculpture memorializing Alfred C. Kinsey's significant and enduring contributions to Indiana University now sits on the Bloomington campus, marking the 75th anniversary of the institute that bears his name. Kinsey revolutionized the scientific study of sexual behavior. I'm sorry, I'm getting a gorge rising in my throat here. Kinsey revolutionized the scientific study of sexual behavior and provoked an international conversation about sexuality. He founded the Kinsey Institute, the world's leading sexuality research institute, in 1947. Sorry, just reading that made me a little bit nauseous. But for a little bit of context as to why this upsets me so much, let's go back in time to when I was doing research for my book, Back to the Basics of Love. I wrote a chapter in my book all about the religion of sex, as I call it, and not affectionately, and about certain people in our history whose influence and ideologies were directly responsible for the sexual revolution. One of the people who I write about in this chapter is, in fact, Alfred Kinsey. So naturally, I had to do quite a bit of research into the man. So I read his biography by James H. Jones. I read his own works, including Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, which made him particularly popular in the late 1940s and early 1950s. In reading about Kinsey, I learned about who he was and the things he had done and what he had taught as a professor, about his ideology. And it was not pleasant reading, to say the least, and it put my mind in a rather dark place just reading about the man. Then I read Kinsey's own words in Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, and it was as if I was communicating directly with the essence of insidious evil. Now, I don't want to overstate the matter, but this research I had done was very hard on my mind, and particularly extraordinarily heavy on my heart. Now, my wife was there, and she saw how it was affecting me to read about the evil that this man was so proud of committing, so proudly responsible for, and the wickedness that he had considered to be his achievements. My wife could see the change in my behavior and in my demeanor, and that it was becoming more and more pronounced the deeper I was delving into this subject matter. She finally had to pull me away from the abyss, right? And practically forced me to take a long sabbatical from studying Kinsey's work, because it was having such a strong effect on me over time. Kinsey was so deeply involved in the depraved and the hedonistic, and so detached from any sense of good and moral right, and such was so reflected in his work that prolonged exposure to his darkness was leaving me enveloped in a cloud of anguish. And I had touched the darkness, and the longer I touched it, the more it pulled me in and attempted to engulf me. Forgive me for getting a little bit Edgar Allan Poe on you there for a moment. But who was Alfred Kinsey, this man whom many other cultures seem to somehow admire, and yet whose evil could put me in such a dark place mentally? Now, for your sake, I won't delve too deeply into the chilling void of this topic, but I will give you a brief overview because it is an important topic to delve into and discuss. Alfred Kinsey is often referred to as the father of the sexual revolution. His first book, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, published in 1948, was a best-selling culmination of research, if you can call it that, into the subject of, well, you guessed it, how men allegedly behave sexually. This book wasn't quite as simple as an educational text, however. The book was primarily written in an effort to convince to convince the culture that societal or personal restrictions on human sexual behavior were unnatural and thus immoral. It would be less accurate to call it an educational text and probably more appropriate to refer to it as pervert propaganda. It was Kinsey's ultimate goal to see all rules and ethics, mores surrounding sex to be abolished. And note how I didn't say most rules surrounding sex. To get his questionable points across, Kinsey knowingly skewed data and fabricated statistics to claim that the vast majority of people were engaged in secret, crazy, unorthodox, and taboo sexual practices. That all of this was going on the down low, outside the public eye. And some of the milder examples of his phony statistics include the following. And remember, this is in the 1940s. Kinsey claimed that 50% of all married men commit adultery, often consistently or habitually. He claimed that 69% of all white men have had experience with prostitutes, and that 10% of men were exclusively homosexual. He also claimed that 95% of single women have had abortions. Now, while each of these statistics and more like them have been widely refuted since Kinsey published this book, largely because he gathered these numbers by knowingly conducting his research on sex offenders and criminals, these statistics still went a long way in engaging the public's imagination and attitudes about sex. Lies will often have such an effect when presented in advance of the truth. In addition to being very comfortable with lying, Kinsey vehemently dismissed all moral aspects of sex. Moral and ethical questions simply just did not concern him, as will become abundantly clear in a moment. And he spent a lot of his time and energy both in and outside of the lecture hall trying to convince everybody else to forsake morality and liken themselves to animals. It was Kinsey who coined the phrase, "Just as the birds do it, the bees do it, so should we do it." Yes, birds and the bees was Kinsey's cliche. And Kinsey especially abhorred Judeo-Christian morality, what he often referred to as Victorian morality. He found the very idea of chastity or purity repugnant. To paraphrase a passage on page 661 of Kinsey's Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, and I'll put it up on the screen for you in case you want to read the whole passage, he said, "Without society's demands of morality, choosing a sex partner would be like picking out the day's clothes or dinner." Apparently, in Kinsey's estimation, a partner is not so much a human being as a sirloin to be consumed and then forgotten about at the bottom of a trash can. Kinsey writes in his book, again paraphrasing for brevity, "There is no clear right or wrong. Sexual behavior naturally changes over time from one habit to another. It is not a moral issue, so we shouldn't judge people with different sexual appetites than us, no matter what that sexual appetite is." Now, that last part is a very important piece. Put simply, Kinsey's doctrine is, whatever feels good to me must be good. The logical conclusion to Kinsey's argument is that rape, sexual assault, and child molestation should be accepted because these people simply have different needs or definitions of what feels good to them. Anyone who sticks to Kinsey's ideology will see nothing immoral about any of these practices. Now, I'm not projecting these opinions onto him. No, he exemplifies himself just how little trouble he has in his conscience about such atrocities. Alfred Kinsey shamelessly devoted time and study to the interactions that pedophiles had with children and infants. This is something that Kinsey actually did. Not only did the man correspond with people who raped young children and babies, but he was so directly involved in these crimes that he supplied these rapists with stopwatches to be used during these horrific acts that they perpetrated, and asked that they report directly to him about their sadistic experiences. Kinsey wanted to hear from these rapists about what they did to children. In investigating and reporting on this research, and using the loosest possible definition of the word research, Sarah D. Good rightly said, "There is a name for such behavior in civilized countries, but that name is not science." That's a polite way of saying that Kinsey was a deviant monster of psychopathic proportions. The man I'm talking about did not belong in academia, and he certainly doesn't deserve to have a statue built in his honor on Indiana University's campus. No, he deserved to be thrown into a cell deep underground, as far away from human civilization as possible, and probably given the death penalty, then to be forgotten about the world forever. Putting up a statue in Kinsey's honor and hailing him as a hero is not much better than putting up an idol of Molech on the campus. You know, the demonic being to whom the Canaanites sacrificed their own children in quite a horrific manner. Seems like an appropriate metaphor, considering how many children Kinsey himself victimized, and how many children would continue to be victimized, go on to be victimized by those who were inspired by Kinsey's influence, such as the infamous John Money, who ran brutal, inhuman sexual experiments on young boys, and Hugh Hefner, the father of the porn industry. This is the kind of individual the world reveres when its inhabitants have turned their backs on God, separated themselves from him, and by extension, separated themselves from the very essence of what is good. When you reject God, you don't believe in nothing. You believe in anything and grasp a hold of anything that you can. Without God in our hearts, the secular world starts to seek pleasures of the flesh above all else. That is the natural state of affairs, that of paganism. Without God, there can be no meaning, but that does not excuse those who reject God from needing meaning or from seeking it out. They're always going to. So they very ill-advisedly seek meaning through carnal pursuits. Sex becomes, and has become in our culture today, all that matters. And the pursuit of pleasure becomes the secular God. What I call in my book, the religion of sex. That is how you end up with cultural institutions making it a priority to cater to people with deviant sexual appetites. Not only do they make it their business to know what everyone is doing in the bedroom, which is creepy enough by itself, but people's proclivities become synonymous with their identity in the eyes of those institutions. If you are a homosexual, that's all you are to them. That's all they care about. Your whole personality, your whole reason for existing is your homosexuality as far as they are concerned. Without God, we have no inherent value, and thus we are nothing more than our pursuits, than our desires. In Kinsey's words, we are nothing more than sexual beings. That was his whole life's work, to prove that we exist only to feed our own appetites, and that all other human beings of all ages exist merely as morsels. To Kinsey, there is no morality to consider. There is no inherent human worth to be concerned about. There is no humanity in yourself or anyone else. We are all beasts, apparently. There is only sex and your own narcissistic desire, your own pleasure. Anyone who is hurt in the process, be it man, woman, or child, is just a victim of natural selection. That's it. That's Kinsey's worldview. That is the influence of a Molech-like spirit, demonic spirit that permeates our society. That it is prevalent in our society's ever-increasing consumption of vile pornography, in hookup culture, in high rates of abortion, and in the highly disturbing insistence of some people in our society to sexualize children. I'm calling out specifically anyone involved in children's drag shows, in those who push transgendering the children, and in the organization ETR for its insistence on teaching pornography to elementary school children. But then again, if you ever trusted the public school system to teach your kids about sex, that's your mistake. Public school sex ed is yet another legacy of Kinsey. It's taught his way. It's by his design. All of this grows from the perverse worldview of Alfred Kinsey. It's his ideal, and that is the insidious influence that Indiana University has chosen to cherish, commemorate, deify, and make a hero to its students and faculty. Shame on you, Indiana, and on many more of our institutions of higher learning, the most prestigious of which started out as seminary schools, by the way. Oh, how far they have fallen. They eliminated God from their concerns and thus have lost touch with him at the cost of their humanity, and now have become tools of furthering unspeakable evil. If people like Alfred Kinsey and those who hail him as a hero are the kind of people who you want educating our youth, keep sending your kids to public schools and to public universities by all means. If not, might I suggest a trade school or a trustworthy private institution. Emphasis on trustworthy, such as Hillsdale College. I'm a fan. Forces of evil have their slimy tendrils wrapping themselves around most, if not all, of the major institutions of our nation because we have allowed it. All that is necessary for evil to prosper is for the righteous and the good men to do nothing, and we are now reaping what we have sown. Christians have grown complacent. Men of goodwill and of character have grown lazy and victim to sloth. It is far beyond time for us to get our heads out of the sand and start presenting a powerful resistance to the powers and principalities of darkness that are now infecting our nation and the world more broadly. Again, because we have allowed it to. Stand for your faith. Stand for what is true and for virtue. Stand with and trust in Christ. Let's start taking an active role in bringing this world back to God and stop taking a passive role in letting it fall to evil and letting it take our children down with it. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you have not yet, don't forget to check out my book, Back to the Basics of Love, A Single Christian's Guide to Dating, Sex, and Morality in a Secular World. You can find more information on Kinsey and on the religion of sex fiasco more broadly, as well as plenty of information for living your life in a way that really does take on the powers and principalities of darkness in this world. So please check out that book. And as always, if you appreciated what you heard, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. All three would help out tremendously. You can find me on YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you so much for your time, and God bless.